is conditional sentences. Conditional sentences are basically if sentences or if clause which express conditions or suppositions. There are different types of conditional sentences like type 1, type 2, type 3 and finally zero conditionals. Now let us discuss each one of them. First one is type 1. In type 1 conditional, it is used to describe conditions which may or may not be fulfilled. It is also called the real conditional because the condition to be fulfilled is real. If the condition is fulfilled, then there will be a likely result. Now, the structure, let us go discuss about the structure of conditional sentence type 1. In the if clause, it will be if plus simple present, whereas in the main clause, the clause must be in simple future. Example, if you study hard, you will succeed. Now, what is the condition we make here? That if you study hard, the result will be you will succeed. So therefore, if you observe this sentence, this example, you will understand that if the condition is fulfilled, the result is likely to be, or there will be a likely result. Now look at the second example. If I win a lottery, I will buy a car. Now what is the condition is put forth? That is, if I win the lottery, and the result will be I will buy a car. Now the rule is I said that if plus simple present must be there in if clause, and in the main clause it must be simple future. But it is not always that in the if clause it must be simple present. It can be other tenses of present tense. Now look at these following examples. If she is coming today, she will stay with us. Now if she is coming today, is in present continuous tense, and whereas in the main clause it is simple future. So therefore it doesn't have to be always simple present in the if clause. It can be present continuous and it can be present perfect. Now look at the second example. If he has heard of your conversation, he will inform the teacher. Now if he has heard of our conversation, it is in present perfect. Now look at the third example. If he has been traveling all night, he will need rest. Now if he has been traveling, it's in present perfect continuous. So therefore there can be variations to the tenses in the if clause, and it is not always should be in simple present. It can be present continuous, present perfect and present perfect continuous. Now there are certain variations to this. Okay, instead of if, we can also use unless, we can also use should, and we can also use provided that. Now let us discuss few of the variations in conditional 1. First one is the using of unless instead of if. And before looking into the example, remember if is in negative, then unless will be in affirmative. Example, if he doesn't apologize, he will be punished. You see, if he doesn't apologize is a negative sentence. And when we use unless instead of if, the sentence becomes affirmative. Unless he apologizes, he will be punished. So that's how we use unless instead of if. Now how do we use should instead of if? Now let us see the sentence with if. If you should see Paul, he will be happy. Now if we want to avoid if in the sentence and still keep the sentence in conditional 1, then the should must be placed before the subject. You see here should is placed before the subject you. So therefore we say, should you see Paul, he will be happy. So this sentence is as conditional as that with if. Now how do we use provided that instead of if? Now let us see a sentence with if and we replace if with provided that. I will allow you to play if you complete your homework by this evening. And now we use provided that. I will allow you to play provided that you complete your homework by this evening. Yes, so that's some of the variations under conditional type 1. Now let us discuss type 2, conditional type 2. Now this type 2 conditional is also called the conditions of the unreal past, because here the condition, this conditional is used to express the imaginary situations in the if clause and speculate about their imaginary consequences or results in the main clause. So this is purely a kind of imaginary or unreal thing. Now the structure. In the if clause, it must be if plus simple past, whereas in the main clause, it must be subject plus would or could or was able to plus V1 plus object. Now let us look at the example. If he did the same mistake again, the manager would dismiss him. You see, if he did the same mistake is in simple past, whereas in the main clause it is conditional. Second example, if he were here, he would help us. If he were here, he would help us. So that's how the condition which is actually unreal. Now there are also certain variations to this conditional as well. There is begin a sentence with should or begin a sentence with where, and when we do that it still remains in conditional 2. And you must have seen that in conditional type 1, when we discussed, we began the sentence with should. So the same applies even here also. So should can appear in conditional type 1 and type 2 as well. Should he hear of your success, he would be happy. And where, see, if it were to be fine tomorrow, we would finish the work. Now this sentence is with if. Now if you want to avoid if and keep this sentence still in conditional, then this where has to come before the subject. Therefore, were it to be fine tomorrow, we would finish the work. See, the sentence still became a conditional sentence. Now let us look at the type 3 conditional. Type 3 conditionals are also called the hypothetical conditionals. It refers to actions which did not take place in the past, which was supposed to take place in the past, but it did not take place. So such kind of situations or actions, we express them in conditional type 3. Now the structure. In the if clause, it must be if plus past perfect, whereas in the main clause, it must be perfect conditional, or subject plus would plus have plus third form of the verb plus object. Example, if you had invited me to your party, I would have come. You see, if you had invited me, it's in past perfect, and in the main clause is subject would plus have plus V3. Second example, if he had arrived earlier, they would have taken him too. Now the if clause, it is in past perfect, whereas in the main clause it is perfect conditional. So this basically refers to actions which were supposed to take place in the past, but it didn't. Now there are certain variations. First is begin sentence with had. Example, had you invited me to your party, I would have come. So what difference do we notice here? In this variation, if you want to avoid, you see this sentence is with if, but if you want to avoid if, then you must begin the sentence with had. So therefore, had you invited me. Similarly, in the second example you see here you have sentence with if. If he had arrived earlier, they would have taken him too. But if you avoid if, then you must begin the sentence with had. Had he arrived earlier, they would have taken him too. Now the second variation to this conditional 3 is begin the sentence with but for or using but for instead of if. So but for means if it were not for or if it hadn't been for. Example, if he had not helped her, she would have failed. Now here we have the sentence with if. Now let us use but for instead of if. But for his help, she would have failed. See, if he hadn't helped became but for his help, she would have failed. So that's how the conditional 3. Now the last one is the 0 conditional. So in 0 conditionals is basically refers to things or universal fact or truth. When we express those things, we use 0 conditional. Since it expresses truth and fact, therefore in the if clause it must be simple present. At the same time, in the main clause also it must be simple present instead of simple future. In conditional 1, the structure is if plus simple present. In the main clause it is simple future. But in 0 conditional, it must be, in the main clause it must be simple present as well. Example, if they eat too much, they get fat. See, this expresses about a fact, a truth, that if they eat too much, they get fat. So getting fat is a truth. So therefore, it remains, the main clause remains in simple present. Second example, if you touch fire, you get burnt. This is a truth, this is a universal truth or fact. Therefore, in both the clauses remain in simple present itself. I hope so you have understood the conditional sentences very well. So please do like, subscribe and share. Thank you.